I went to Amazon in 2006, and at that particular time, Amazon wasn't what it is today. There were 50 people. That
Wow.
was technology and operations. We're going to start to see a shift where AI would be that smart ant that you had that knew what you wanted. Your favorite present always had it every year. The data is everything. AI is a consumer of data.
This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejillo. Today, on the Future of the Future, I am joined by Charles Griffith, a technologist who helped build part of the early foundation behind Amazon's logistics infrastructure. Retail logistics is being pushed to its limits. Customers expect everything faster, supply chains are more fragile than ever, and the systems that move goods around the world are under enormous pressure to become smarter, faster, and more resilient. Today, we will explore how technology has transformed the logistics landscape from the early architectures that made modern fulfillment possible to the emerging technologies reshaping how goods are tracked, moved, and delivered. We will also dig into why data collaboration and new leadership mindsets will determine which retailers survive in the next decade and which will fall behind. Charles, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mateo, for having me.
What are the biggest ways technology has redefined the retail logistics landscape since you first started in your career, and which shifts do you think matter most today?
Well, that's a big question. My career started in the early 1900s. No, just kidding. But it feels like it sometimes when you look back at how far and how fast things have come, just from, the overall technology growth in general across all industries and how much has changed. And specifically in logistics, when I started, I went to Amazon in 2006. And at that particular time, Amazon wasn't what it is today. It was a much smaller company. In fact, for all of the transportation capabilities for the entire company, there were 50 people. That
Wow.
was technology and operations. It's obviously exploded since then. And so at that particular time, Amazon was much like some of the very latent trailing retailers today still. They had just an Uber contract with UPS at that particular point, and they had obviously some contracts with others like DHL and FedEx and so forth. But at that particular point, it was fulfillment through enterprise carrier. And so over the course of that period of time, we've gone all the way through, the journey of creating local couriers and regional couriers and going all the way down to Amazon as a carrier. And so all of that has been enabled through technology and through the changes in government and in everything, including customers, which without the customer change, none of it would happen.
Yeah. And looking back on your work helping building that foundation for Amazon Logistics, what core technological principles or architectures do you think lay the groundwork for modern retail fulfillment?
Well, I think the first one is the ability to take big bets and do it in an iterative nature, right? You can't just take a big bet and go after something and try and make V1, where you're going to, pin your hat to. In the case of Amazon, obviously there was a lot of discussion about becoming not even just a carrier, but providing its own capabilities for delivery and what that meant and how broad that would be. And that was a very honed vision before it ever, began to be implemented. And so initially, one of the first things we did was we packaged that into really four directions that we were going to invest. One of those was sort centers, which, many people don't hear much about unless you live near one. But that was the consolidation of all of the flow of inventory for multiple fulfillment centers, which was a big thing for Amazon because Amazon, like many companies, put fulfillment centers where it was inexpensive and not necessarily close to customers, which means it's not going to be fast. So the first thing was to consolidate that flow. The next thing was to really get a better handle on the shipping through, trucks, both full and less than truckload, and create a better management system for that. The next was really to look at the last mile. And it wasn't necessarily a viable service in all markets. In fact, last mile started in China with Amazon's acquisition of a company called Joyo. And then we tested our own version of that as we began to build on that technology in the UK. And it was really only with the acquisition of Whole Foods that Amazon started to look at rolling it out in the US. So you have to have a strategy and an ability to go after something that you see is going to be critical to doing business. Then you need to iterate in a way that makes business sense. And I think that's where when you talk about most retailers, their focus is on what is their brand and what are they doing. They're not focused on the extension or the broader vision of what their product is, and that's really what separates winners and losers.
Which emerging technologies do you believe are most transforming how goods are moved, tracked, and managed across retail supply chains?
Well, I mean, AI is everything, right? We hear it in every single conversation, but the reality is it really is transforming how things work and it's moving rapidly. And again, it's not that AI hasn't been around since, for many, many years. In fact, in early Amazon, we were using it for a variety of things. We used it for things like Amazon Global. If anyone has used that product, it was a service where customers in countries that didn't have an Amazon marketplace could order products without duties and tariffs, which is a huge deterrent to buying anything. Um, and so, we used a classification engine to figure out how to get things shipped with the right harmonized tariff codes, and also to start to understand what uh, the buyer demand was in those markets. So, coming back, I think that quite honestly, AI is going to continue to transform things. It's going to transform the way that we think about buying products. Already, we're starting to see the emergence of auto buying, something that everyone laughs
Mm.
about, maybe 5 years ago. But now, as we look at how good the technology is for anticipating what people want, starting with the advent of investment in um, you know, all of this digital marketing and advertising, we're going to start to see a shift where AI starts to drive the purchasing as opposed to us going antiquated interface and clicking check. As that happens, it's going to transform the whole underneath portion of what retail technology is and start to make it more of an agent based opposed to what it is today, which is very reactive.
How dystopian do you think that can get? Do you think, Christmas shopping eventually I will have an AI agent that knows the tastes of the people I love and it's going to just make recommendations or even go about it and go like, hey, all of your shopping is done for this season?
I think would be that smart aunt that you had that knew what you wanted, your favorite present, always had it every year. And many times, what she was doing is she was looking for that product from the beginning of the year, not in the last few weeks before that holiday. And so I think that's going to be the advantage of these AI bots and these AI uh, agent systems is they're going to constantly be looking for products based on, changes in demand. If you buy too early, you might not want that product by the time you fulfill it. So there, it's not going to be a static. It's going to be a very evolved kind of series of decisions. And I think initially, very much like we saw with music, humans will play a part in training those systems, right? Where
Right.
you'll have some kind of role in saying, "Hey, no, I don't want that." But eventually, we'll start to see the things that we buy every day, the things on Amazon that would be called subscribe and save, right, will start to become the first things that become auto buying. And then we'll start to see it go into the things that are more of the, you know, uh, kind of a decision made against my discretionary income that usually I would make. But
Right.
there's always a guitar like one of those ones sitting on the back of your wall there that you've got your eye on that you haven't been able to find, and these agents can go out to strange marketplaces. We'll start to see better and better integration and availability of products. So it's really going to change from a world where we've seen these smaller sellers emerging. It'll go all the way down, as we've seen with things like Craigslist and so forth, where the individual P2P kind of seller will have much more of a magnitude and a much larger domain that they're serving. So,
How do digital systems improve last mile delivery and customer experience?
well, the first is trust. Without having the data and the visibility to the movement of the products, right? Um, Customers tend to cancel orders. That those retailers that have bad AI or bad rather tracking systems, have higher cancellations. That's just a fact. The next thing is the ability to give the real-time feedback. For a long time, a lot of these tracking systems didn't provide the ability to, see changes in flow or things that, might cause the customer to be concerned, right? I remember early on, when you see a complex network like, say, a UPS or a FedEx where they have many stops, the customer would actually generate a lot of contacts. Why is that product flowing from, through Tennessee when I live in Seattle, Washington?
Yeah.
Am I going to get it on time and so forth? But over time, the visibility of all of those details has instilled greater confidence with customers because they've started to learn this across their purchases. So I think the next thing is visibility. And then the last thing is changes in demands or in fulfillment. So when there's been a storm and you see that the shipment is delayed, that actually doesn't cause you to cancel. It actually gives you greater faith in the retailer. So again, it's a trust system. I think that the underpinnings of that system is, again, all about data, but it's also about how you use that data and how you surface it to customers. There's a lot of decisions in how that's done.
So data does really play a fundamental role in enabling more resilient and responsive retail logistics networks.
Yeah, absolutely. AI, or rather, data is everything. AI is a consumer of data. Um, all of the systems that you need to run retail rely on AI. Forecasting, right? To understand what kind of inventory I'm going to need, where I'm going to need it. Um, your ability to understand real-time performance is feedback via data. Your ability to make future decisions with predictive analytics is driven by data. Ultimately, if you're going to start to reduce human touch and get more efficient, automation is driven by data, classification, simulation, everything relies on data. And I think the availability of data and the ability to store data more effectively is why we're seeing retail get so much better in the last 5 years.
How are technologies enabling better collaboration across the extended supply chain, and what barriers still remain?
So integration is the phrase that pays, I guess, right? We've seen whole companies built on just the ability to integrate from one partner to another, and we've seen whole systems built to provide a multifaceted, multi-customer or multi company offering, right? Like Salesforce, for example, right, has bought a lot of these pieces. I think it's quite honestly one of the big departures. If I look back earliest in my career, we had these monolithic ERP systems. Now what we're having these microservice architectures where you can try multiple different solutions so that you're not reliant on a single technology or a single vendor. And it has given the ability for more modern, although less stable companies to emerge and grow much more rapidly. So I think, again, integration and the ability to showcase different solutions in one ecosystem is big. The barriers are still the same. The barriers come back to, humans. Humans are always the barrier. And we're looking at some departures where, they're what I would call very future investments with specific areas things like robotics, right? Robotics have a great purpose in places where you have a lot of repetition, you have a lot of area where you can get a lot per robot, you can run it in longer shifts and so forth, right? So it's been great for logistics, for things like picking and for fulfillment and so forth. But when you have smaller and smaller supply chains, how do you cross that barrier and, use fewer people? So that's where I think things like automation work, but we're also seeing improved products for basically automating micro aspects. So things like boxing machines and things like that have come over the last 10, 15 years to smaller and smaller retailers, right, to allow them to get better and better. But I think the human will begin and end that barrier, and you always need humans at different points. The we will never have a pure technology driven solution. And when we do, we won't have any customers that want it. So anyway.
So humans are the ultimate barrier. What organizational and cultural shifts do leaders need to embrace to fully capture the benefits of digital transformation in logistics and supply chain operations?
I think the first thing is that you need a leader that can explain the vision to multiple facets of an organization, right? The best leaders I've had, um, people like Bezos in his heyday, could speak in an S team meeting with a bunch of leaders that were the best in their fields and still drive a very creative decision. And then he could also speak all the way down to an engineer or a fulfillment person in a warehouse, right? Those are the best ones that can sell a vision and make sure that the entire organism is working together towards the same set of goals. Um, so those are hard to get to. It's very hard to find those types of leaders. I do find that again, I hate to keep coming back to AI, but more and more, we're having AI that's providing the ability to bridge leadership like that. The danger is that you have to be smart enough to know how to ask the right prompts, and you have to
Yep.
be able to filter those so that you're not selling the wrong answer, because it's very easy to chase the wrong thing when you are overconfident in a particular answer. And so that becomes the next thing. You need a leader that can calibrate and understand through data and through, even organic information when something is going wrong and how to correct. And those are going to be the ones that are going to be the most successful. And when I say leader, I don't just necessarily mean the CEO. I mean leadership at every level. You
Right.
need leadership all the way down to the floor of a warehouse and inside of an engineering team, et cetera.
As we look ahead, what capabilities do you think retailers must develop now at the ground level to be competitive in the next decade?
Well, we talked about auto buying and we talked about, changes in the way that demand will be addressed and served. I think that quite honestly, you don't want to overinvest too early in a particular direction, but you need to be ready to respond. So I think retailers need to be very focused on that, because in my opinion, once we start going to that, it's going to be more of a B2B world again, right? It's going to be all about margins and about accepting bids that are coming in from agentic systems for particular offers. And you're going to have to be able to maintain low margins through efficiency. So being ready for that cultural shift is important. Don't overinvest in creating these curated solutions for consumers, because that's not going to be where the industry is going. That's 10 years ago. The other thing I think that's very important is over the last 20 years, we've had an extreme investment in what I call outbound fulfillment for retailers. Cheaper and faster has been the phrase that pays for every retailer. We need to be able to focus on next day. Now it's 4 hour delivery, et cetera,
Right.
depending on your regions and so forth. And very little has been done on the supply side. In the US, obviously, we've had all kinds of crazy policy changes for tariffs and so forth that have caused many retailers to go under because they're single country of origin supply chain sourced. And
Yeah.
so understanding how to start looking at inbound fulfillment, looking at things like Toyota taught with lean manufacturing to reduce safety stock because that's a cost, right? You want to have a fluid supply chain where you're basically got the inventory you need to serve the demand that is out there. And so being more balanced in terms of the way you run your supply chains through technology, which is going to be, better forecasting, it's going to be better inbound management, it's going to be better sourcing solutions. If I was a large retailer, I'd be focused on those particular pieces right now because reducing that overall inventory in my network is one of my biggest costs. And then the next would be, looking at my network of what do I really need to stand up from a fulfillment perspective to meet demand? Do I really need 4 hour? Or should I use a service provider and inject into their network and reduce the number of facilities they have? Because facilities are very expensive, and we've seen the collapse of a lot of 3PLs worldwide over the last 5 years because you just can't keep the demand running at the same pace.
Charles, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. This has been an amazing conversation. I hope we get to stay in touch and maybe do this again in the future.
Absolutely, we will. In fact, you can get on those drums back there. I'll go get my bass, and we'll continue.
Ah, don't get me started. Don't get me started. I know you live in Seattle, so I might visit and we will get to do a jam session.
Anytime, anytime, Mateo. Thank you so much.